angels who are in charge of the Lord's army. They come before the Ancient of Days and they say, situation's bad. Something's got to happen. What do you want us to do to rectify the situation? And Yahweh, of course, says, number one, I'm going to send a flood upon the earth to destroy all life that's contained therein. And additionally, I want you archangels to take the fallen watchers and throw them into Tartarus. More specifically, you have here in this paragraph, beginning at verse 4, they're talking about Azazel in particular, who was one of the worst of the lot. He taught humanity some of the worst, most vile, most evil arts that we have inherited to this day. And so he was hanging out in the desert one day, as the powers of darkness are wont to do, and Raphael comes, binds him hand and foot, and throws him down into Tartarus, where he is to this very day, waiting for the final judgment. So all of that has happened, and then we begin here in verse 9 of chapter 10. Yahweh continues. He has already decreed an issue against Azazel and the other fallen watchers, and then he says to Gabriel, go against the bastard spirits, against the base ones and the sons of fornication, in other words, the giants. Go against the giants and destroy the sons of the watchers among human beings. Send them into the battle for destruction, for they do not have length of days, and their fathers will not have any questioning even concerning them, because they hope to live an eternal life, and because each of them will live 500 years. Basically, Yahweh is saying these giants are bad news in a lot of ways, not the least of which is because they are utterly bloodthirsty. They want nothing but the complete destruction of Yahweh's good creation. And because of their supernatural heritage, they live unusually long periods of time. They live for 500 years on average. And as a result, they can cause a lot of destruction. So get rid of them because they are bad news. Verse 11, then Michael said, Michael is another one of the archangels, go and make known to Semi-Azah. He was another one of the big baddies from the fallen watchers. Go to Semi-Azah and the remaining watchers with him, those women with whom they mixed, being defiled in their uncleanness. Should their sons ever be slaughtered and see the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them for 70 generations in the wooded vales of the earth, until the day of their judgment and consummation, until the judgment of the eternity of eternities is complete. Then they will be led away into the gaping abyss of fire, and into the torment and the jail, being shut up from eternity. And whoever is burned up and destroyed from the present, they will be bound up together with them until the completion of the generation. Destroy all the spirits of frauds and the sons of the watchers on account of wronging human beings. Destroy all wrongdoing from the earth. Let every work of wickedness come to an end. Let the plants of righteousness and truth be revealed into eternity. It will be planted with joy. So most of that is doom, gloom, and destruction. Take the remaining watchers, throw them into Tartarus, and one day at the end of days, they will be thrown into hell, along with the rest of the underworld. Destroy all wrongdoing from the earth, so that, and then the tone begins to shift in a more positive direction, beginning in verse 17. All the righteous ones will flee, and they will be the living ones until they father thousands, and all the days of their youth, and their Sabbath rest will fill with peace. Then the whole earth will work in righteousness, and the tree will be planted in it and filled with blessing. You guys might be picking up overtones of the new heavens and the new earth here. Garden of Eden 2.0 in the book of Revelation. The tree of life being planted again and being accessible to human beings again. Verse 19, all the trees of the earth will rejoice exceedingly. The tree of life will be planted, and they will be planting vines. The vine that they plant will make pitchers of wine. According to each of the sown seeds, it will make 1,000 measures of olives. It will make up to 10 jugs. What's being communicated here is overabundance. It's actually in God's providence for the impact lesson tonight. We're going to be talking about this as well. biblical imagery related to overabundance as it is depicted in the Messianic age. So I didn't plan that. That was God's providence, but here you're going to see it twice today because all of you are going to be an impact. But yes, so what we're being given here in this imagery are pictures of wine, 1,000 measures of olives, so on and so forth. These are measures that are much larger, much more abundant than would be reaped in reality in the ancient world. So you're being given a poetic description of when the end of days comes, when God makes all things right, there will be peace, there will be no more sorrow, no more pain, there will be joy and good things in overabundance. Verse 20. Oh, sorry. Did I see a raised hand somewhere out of the corner of my eye? Yeah, okay. I always want to stop for questions if there are any. Verse 20. And you, make the earth clean from all uncleanness and all wrongdoing and all sins, ungodliness and uncleanness, oh dear, that is upon the earth. Wipe it away, and all the people will be serving, blessing, and worshiping me. The whole earth will be made clean from all defilement, all uncleanness, wrath, and suffering. I will never send it upon them again unto all the generations of the ages. Never again will sin and its consequences be seen in God's good creation. And then chapter 11, nice and short, wonderfully short. Then I will open the chambers of the blessing. Yes?
I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When they're talking about the binding this guy, and is all of this happening before or after the flood? The giants died before the flood or after?
It's all, so the binding of the watchers, that happens shortly before the flood. Right around the same time, but shortly before, and then the flood comes. So first, the fallen watchers are imprisoned, then the giants are killed in the flood.
That's the reason I was asking this, because I've always been taught that the giants were killed during the flood.
Mm-hmm.
So
And the reason, and I think I understand where you're going with this. There then comes the question of where did the later giants come from, like Goliath. Several possible explanations have been offered. The one that I think is the most likely is that there was another rebellion among the fallen watchers. There were some stupid ones that didn't learn the lesson from the first round. And the reason that I think that's plausible is because in Revelation chapter 12, you also have a description of a third of the heavenly host falling when Jesus is born. So you have the woman in the skies who gives birth to the Messiah, which is, in that apocalyptic context, it's not talking about Mary specifically, it's more the 12 tribes of Israel. The descendants of Abraham birthed Jesus. And then the dragon attempts to devour the Messiah, and he sweeps a third of the stars out of heaven. So when Jesus was born, apparently there were about a third of the watchers that saw that and decided, we don't like that. We don't like that Yahweh is doing this special, exceptional, extraordinary thing of becoming incarnate to save his chosen from among humanity. We don't like that the human beings are being privileged like that. And thus they fell and rebelled against God. Now, if you have a rebellion that took place before Genesis 6, and if you have one that takes place when Jesus is born, why can't you have a third one somewhere in the middle where the later generation of giants came from as well?
So again, the giants, regardless of where they show up in any of these three stages, they are actually the watchers with human women producing the giants.
Correct. Giants are half human, half angel, if you want to think of it that way. Oh yes, Sophia.
Well, this is kind of a weird question, but like,
Weird questions are good.
but like, would the giants be able to like marry each other and have kids or not?
Yes, and the reason I say that is because where would Goliath come from if not?
Right.
Because per what we just read in chapter 10, the giants on average had a lifespan of about 500 years. David, when he does what he does with Goliath, that's around 1000 BC. And so even if you're assuming that Goliath is elderly and crippled at that point, which it doesn't sound like he is, he sounds like he's in youthful vigor, but at most you would have to say that Goliath was born in about 1500 BC. And could that have been the result of a human being and a watcher? Maybe. But there's also no particular reason why giants can't have children among themselves as well. They are creatures of flesh and blood, and as a result, they can do all of the same things that other creatures of flesh and blood can do. Yes?
So it also talks about, when David is going, if he's killing off all the giants, kind of, it talks about, like, was that Goliath's brother that he was talking about?
Yes. There's somewhere in, I believe it's 1 Samuel, I'm forgetting the exact quotation, but the text tells us that David hunted, I think it was 5 of Goliath's brothers, and they were all scattered throughout the Pentapolis, the 5 cities of the Philistines.
And so were they actual brothers, or they just grabbed like other giants, but called them brothers because they were giants?
It could be either or. I'm inclined to say the more face value judgment, that they are flesh and blood brothers. Excellent questions. Any more?
So then I'm guessing there were girl giants as well? Well, they don't get mentioned nearly as much.
Correct, yeah. It's off the top of my head, I don't remember anywhere in the biblical record that female giants are mentioned, but I do know if you look at the folklore across human civilizations, so it's an interesting thing. You guys have probably heard before that one of the strong evidences for Noah's flood being a historical event is the fact that every civilization has a story of a global flood. It's kind of the same way if you look at the ancient history and the stories being told by the Norse Vikings and the Greeks and the Japanese and all over the place. Almost every civilization has stories about bloodthirsty giants. And I know for a fact, I've read some Norse mythology that mentions female giants. So is it possible that there were female giants? Yes, and I'm inclined to think that, they were 50% in the same way that you have 50% of human beings that are female. But, hey, they're beautiful. But in the biblical record in particular, there were no female giants who were so central to the biblical story that they were worth explicitly mentioning. But were they around? I think so. Good question. Very good question. So, nice short chapter 11. Then I, that is Yahweh, I will open the chambers of blessing that are in the heavens, also to bring them down upon the deeds, upon the toil of the sons of men. This is, again, speaking of the new heavens and the new earth when all is made right. And then truth and peace will share together for all the days of eternity and for all the generations of human beings. And I especially like the little sections like this. As we go along, you're going to see that a good portion of First Enoch is doom and gloom, judgment type stuff. But every once in a while, you get little reprieves like this that talk about once all the doom and gloom and judgment is over with, this is what we have to look forward to on the other side. So I really like this chapter, short as it is. Now, you guys have read up to that point. Now beginning in chapter 12, this is all new material. My apologies that the first little bit of it will be going into blind. You guys don't have a chance to look in advance. But nevertheless, I'm going to pass these around. Everybody take one so that you can be reading through chapters 12 through 16 in the coming week. And I have one more unstapled spare if somebody needs one. And we will press on. everybody read this, by the way? Is the font large enough?
A little bit bigger.
A little bit.
There's nothing worse if I'm watching somebody give a presentation and the text is so small I can't read it. Thank you. A spare page.
And it has red ink.
That's the best ink. Okay. So, our next major section, the fallen watchers talk to Enoch and they attempt to persuade him to intercede on their behalf. Just take a wild guess. Do you think that's going to work? No, indeed it will not. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So chapters 12 through 16, Enoch's interaction with the fallen watchers. Okay. So beginning at chapter 12, verse 1, before these things, now these things here, that's referring to Genesis chapter 6. Fall of the watchers, the giants, etc., etc. Shortly before that takes place, Enoch was taken. Now we know that, of course, because the Bible itself tells us in Genesis 5:24 that Enoch walked with God and then he was taken. So there's another biblical connection for you. And no human being knew where Enoch had been taken, or where he was, or what had happened to him. His works were with the watchers, and with the holy ones were his days. In other words, a lot of the stuff that Enoch does here in this book, a lot of the things he sees and things he says and does, he does all of these in the supernatural realm rather than the natural realm. Why? Because God didn't call him to be a prophet until he had already been taken. Enoch's first mission to the fallen watchers. I, Enoch, was standing, blessing the Lord of majesty, the King of the ages. So he's standing in Yahweh's throne room. And look, the watchers of the great Holy One called me, Enoch the scribe, and they said to me, Enoch, righteous scribe, go and say to the watchers of heaven, who forsook the highest heaven, the sanctuary of their eternal station, and defiled themselves with wicked. As the sons of earth do, so they did, and took wives for themselves. Excuse me. And they worked great desolation on the earth. You will receive no peace or forgiveness. That's what they were told. So, quick pause before we go on to verse 6. Notice that Enoch is called a righteous scribe. Why is that significant? What have we talked about before with relationship to the use of the word righteous? Yeah.
Is like, doesn't worship other gods or idols and just worships Yahweh and tries to please him.
Correct. Yes.
In other words, I remember you saying righteous meaning loyal.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So just as correct. The technical term for this is semantic domain. What that basically means is certain words have different meanings depending on the context that you use them. Trunk of a tree, trunk of a car, trunk of an elephant. And righteousness, or righteous, that whole family of words, they are like that. They have several different meanings depending on how you use them. And the reason I want to emphasize this is because we hear the word righteous, and normally we think of it in the sense that Paul uses it in Romans or in Galatians. And in that context, what Paul is talking about, because he's using a lot of judicial language, judgment language. In that context, what he's talking about is basically sinless perfection. There is no one righteous, no, not even one. In that context, it's talking about it when we come before the judgment seat of Christ on the final day, and we are either deemed to be God's people or not, as it were, to go to heaven or to hell. What is the basis upon which our righteousness, our sinlessness, will be judged? And of course, the correct Christian response is, anyone? The blood of Jesus Christ, yes. You cannot do enough work, good works, to earn your way into heaven, because even your best and most generous work is tainted by sinful pride. We cannot do anything perfectly good or perfectly right. And so that is the flavor of word, the particular connotation that Paul uses. But as we talked about earlier around chapter 6, I think, in the context of 1 Enoch, that's not how the word is being used. Enoch is using it in the very same sense that the Bible uses it when it calls Noah a righteous man in his generation. It calls Job a righteous man in Job chapter 1. And Zechariah and Elizabeth, the parents of John the Baptist, they are called righteous in Luke chapter 1. Now in each of those contexts, righteousness doesn't have to do with sinless perfection, because of course those individuals were not sinlessly perfect. But in those contexts, it is referring to, the key word is loyalty. Noah and his 7 family members were the only righteous, the only people who were still loyal to Yahweh in their generation before the flood. Hence the reason that the flood was sent in the first place. Likewise, Job is called a righteous man. Why?
Because he was loyal to God?
Yes, even in spite of all of his suffering, everything that he lost, and his justifiable lament at having even been born. Nevertheless, the one character trait that shined forth through all of that was his loyalty to Yahweh, his unwillingness to go in any other direction, be it paganism, atheism, whatever, wherever he might have gone from there. And so too it is with John the Baptist's parents. Despite the fact that they did not have a child until they were in their old age, they trusted Yahweh that he was going to take care of them right up until the end of their days. So in the same way, in 1 Enoch, anytime you see the word righteous, and curiously, it's a word that's being ascribed to human beings. Remember that in the context of this book, righteousness refers to loyalty to God rather than to sinless perfection. Having said all of that, Enoch, the righteous scribe, is being told to go and speak to the fallen watchers who are now in Tartarus. Beginning at verse 6, concerning their sons, that is the giants, in whom they rejoice. So that's curious. The fallen watchers, they appear to have a love for their children, a love for the giants. You might not necessarily expect that in the same way that human parents, of course, have a love and an affection for their own children. The fallen watchers, as part of their depravity, they developed their own sort of love for their children, the giants. The slaughter of their beloved ones they will see, and over the destruction of their sons they will lament and make perpetual petition. They will have no mercy or peace. So, Enoch, go and say to Azazel, you will have no peace. A great sentence has gone forth against you to bind you. You will have no relief or petition because of the unrighteous deeds that you have revealed, and because of all the godless deeds and the unrighteousness and sin that you have revealed to humans. Yes, Sophia.
I think I may be missing verses 2 through 9 on the pages.
Is that page 7?
Page 2, 4, 6. 2, 4, 6.
Is everybody missing 2?
Yeah.
Printer in the office lied to me. I am sorry. I very much attempted to print all of those pages, and apparently it did not happen. I will have a stern talk to the printer, and next time I will make sure you get all of your pages. I am very sorry.
They only printed out the odd numbers.
It only likes all numbers.
Here I've got all the pages here. That's so odd. I am very sorry. I will seek to rectify this. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. We will press on regardless, I suppose. unless anyone has any additional thoughts or questions before we continue. I'll try to get to the bottom of the page. Where does it end? Verse 9, you said?
Well, we have half of verse 9.
You have half of verse 9. Okay, let's see if we can make it that far before we conclude verse 8.
Bless you.
So verse 3 then. Then I, that is Enoch, I went and spoke to all of the fallen watchers together, and they were all afraid and trembling, and fear seized them. Verse 4. They asked that I write a memorandum of petition for them. In other words, write a letter to God for us, that they might have forgiveness, and that I recite the memorandum of petition for them in the presence of the Lord of heaven. So please go and talk to God for us. See if he'll do a favor for us. Verse 5. For they were no longer able to speak or lift their eyes to heaven, out of shame for the deeds through which they had sinned and for which they had been condemned. Yes?
So did they have a written language at that point?
In all likelihood, they did. Our current understanding of language only goes back to about 3200 BC. The two earliest writing systems that we know of currently are Egyptian and Sumerian. But you're talking going back here way, way back all the way to the days of Enoch. Presumably they had writing, because in fact he's being asked to do this, but we have since lost all record of what any earlier form of writing looked like.
But isn't Enoch right now in heaven?
Yes, and he could be writing in some sort of heavenly script as
Yes.
well. That is a distinct possibility as well.
Oh, so he's in heaven at this point?
Yeah, he has been taken up. He's in the throne room of God, and the archangels are the ones who are communicating all of this stuff to him.
Right here in what's this chapter? I don't know if this has. Chapter 3. No, it's not chapter. Verse 3, chapter 12. It says Enoch standing, blessing the Lord in majesty, of King of ages.
Yeah. So he is worshiping in God's throne room when all of this is happening.
And so are the fallen watchers asking him to do this because they feel bad for what they did? Or is it just like, now we're going to get punished? Quick, we need to do something.
Pretty much that. It's they have lost all recourse to beg themselves, and so they're asking Enoch to beg for them.
So sorry.
No, go ahead.
So how are they asking him? Because in the later verse they say that they can't even lift their eyes or ask God in heaven.
Correct. And that is because this language of not being able to look up toward God, it is similar. This is similar to the phenomenon of human beings not being able to dwell in God's presence. Think about 2 Samuel chapter 6 with Uzzah, who touches the ark and he is struck for coming into direct contact with sacred space. Human beings, because we are sinful, because unless the blood of Jesus Christ has been applied to us, but that's New Testament, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Human beings who have not been atoned for, if they approach sacred space, they are in all likelihood going to be destroyed. And so as a result, human beings, only under very rare conditions can they even come remotely close to God. It's very much the same thing with the fallen watchers. They have rebelled against Yahweh. They are sinful to their very core, in their very being. And as a result, it's kind of like, if you've ever tried to look directly at the sun, don't try to do that, by the way. If you try to stare directly into the sun, it's just too bright. It hurts your eyes to even look, and you have to avert your eyes. It's kind of the same thing that's being communicated here in verse 5. Because they are now fallen and sinful, they cannot even bring themselves to look to God and ask, can we get a do-over? But yes, excellent observation. Verse 6. So Enoch, I wrote out the memorandum of their petition and the requests concerning themselves, with regard to their deeds individually, and concerning their sons, for whom they were making request. that they might have forgiveness and longevity. And I went off and sat by the waters of Dan, in the land of Dan, which is south of Hermon, to the west. I recited to God the memorandum of their petition until I fell asleep. So, the archangels send Enoch off to talk to the watchers in Tartarus. They say, hey, can you write a letter to God saying, hey, can you please forgive us? He does that, and then he is sent back into the natural realm in the land of Dan. Now, I've talked a little bit about the tribe of Dan before. Can anyone tell me why it's significant that he's there, of all places?
Didn't, like, Dan do something really bad, and so they were kind of half cut off from the other tribes of Israel?
Yes. Of the 12 tribes, Dan was the first one to apostatize in 1 Kings chapter 13. They were the first ones to go worshiping other gods, the gods of the Canaanites. And as it just so happens, their particular territory, if you look at a map of the 12 tribes and where their allotments were, Dan is up in the northeast, right next to the territory of Mount Hermon, right next to Bashan. And that makes sense in terms of cosmic geography. If they are the ones that are right next door to the gates of Hades, then of course they are going to be influenced by that. And that's why, funny, another connection to what we're going to be talking about during Impact tonight. In Jacob's blessing, the final blessings of his 12 sons, he says that Dan is a snake. And the reason for that, it's all of these other connections that we've been making. Bashan is where Mount Hermon is, which is where the Genesis 6 stuff took place. It's where the gates of Hades are. The word Bashan means place of the serpent. And so Dan, who immediately went off and worshipped all of these foreign gods, the tribe of Dan is likewise being called a serpent. And when you go to Revelation chapter 7, and you have the counting of the 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes, Dan is not included in that list. He was cut off because of the totality of his severance from God. It's amazing how all of these dots connect together, isn't it? It's awesome stuff. So, in other words, Enoch is being sent to the tribe of what will in the future be the tribal allotment of Dan. Why? Because it's right next door to Mount Hermon, right next door to the underworld. It's a dark and evil place, and it's where he can best get in contact with the fallen watchers. I recited to God the memorandum of their petition until I fell asleep. So in other words, he's asking God on their behalf to have mercy upon them. Not just once, but over and over and over again until he exhausts himself. Does Enoch necessarily believe that God will grant repentance? Probably not, because he knows of Yahweh's righteousness, but the archangel told him to do it, therefore he's going to do it. Enoch's ascent to heaven and second commission to preach to the watchers. Beginning in verse 8, we just might make it to the end of the page. Again, my apologies about that. I don't know how that happened. But verse 8, look, dreams came upon me, and visions fell upon me. And I saw visions of wrath, and there was a voice saying, speak to the sons of heaven to reprimand them. And when I had awakened, I went to them. And all of them were assembled together, and they were sitting and weeping at Avel Maim, which is between Lebanon and Sinir, covering their faces. And I recited in their presence all the visions that I had seen in the dream. And I began to speak the words of truth and the vision, and to reprimand the watchers of heaven. So Enoch, he's pleading until finally he's exhausted. He falls asleep. And then in his dream, Yahweh gives him the answer to his petition. What's he going to say to the watchers? Well, his answer to them begins in chapter 14, verse 1. this is a good pausing point right here. Any additional thoughts or questions up to this point? Not. Let's see, how far can we go? And there might be a lot of material here, so I'll probably save that for next time. We will begin at chapter 14. Since there weren't any thoughts or questions to any of that additional material, we're plowing right through these 108 chapters. Any prayer requests? Yes.
Mom and Dad have a big